go blue, Wolverines, and that's another story. Thanks, Matt, for your wonderful words. I was asked to introduce our guest, the most courageous individual I have ever had the honor of introducing to you tonight. I was humbled beyond words for standing here in front of you because never in my lifetime, and I'm pretty old, would I have ever thought I would be given such an opportunity or such an honor. As Team Kennedy's Macomb County volunteer leader, the key to our upcoming successes for Mr. Robert Kennedy Jr.'s road to the White House begins with you and all the local cities, counties, and states he has and continues to travel. Him coming here to Macomb County Community College is a historic moment for all involved in making this event happen tonight and here in our country. Thank you all for being here and for your help. I have never personally met Bobby Jr., but I lived long enough to remember his uncle, the great President John F. Kennedy, and of course, his dad, Robert F. Kennedy Sr. To stand together. To stand in front of you at this time, at this moment in America's history is truly humbling. I believe this campaign is one of the political events that will be recorded in the annals of the United States history. Mr. Kennedy's decision to run for president rises to the level of our founding fathers and mothers, where one man has the courage and the tremendous achievements of a lifetime to be elected to be our next president. Therefore, I would like for all of us to give Mr. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. our most heartfelt welcome, a welcome to our next 47th president of the United States of America.
Thank you very, very much for that warm introduction and for so many of you coming out on a rainy, rainy day. And I want to thank Arnie Simpkins, a great, iconic football hero from the Minnesota Vikings. And he played for a few years in my neighborhood with the New York Jets. And again, I want to thank all of you for coming here today. I was in San Francisco about 3.5 weeks ago. And I spent almost a year in San Francisco in 2018 trying three Monsanto cases. And they ended up, we won all 3 cases. The third one, we asked the jury for $1 billion and they gave us $2.2 billion.
Yeah.
And that brought Monsanto to the negotiating table, and we finally made the big settlement on Roundup. But every day before, because I had to try 3 cases in succession, I lived there for the better part of the year. And I went to, every morning before court, I would go to the gym in Union Square. Union Square in San Francisco is like 5th Avenue in New York City. It has all of the big American stores, Gap and Nordstrom and Bloomingdale's and Macy's and Old Navy and Levi. And then it has all the big foreign brands like De La Valle and Prada and Gucci and Burberry and Ferragamo, etc. And people come from all over the world to shop there. It's a huge shopping place for Asians, and it's the economic engine for San Francisco. And I went back 3.5 weeks ago, and every one of those stores is closed. And there's just acre after acre of plywood. And it's like if all of 5th Avenue in New York closed. And there were no stores left, and that's what San Francisco is today. And the reason they're closed is because of the chaos on the streets from the homelessness crisis. There's open drug markets, and it's not safe to be on the streets in San Francisco, and it's not sanitary. And so people don't want to go there anymore, and they don't want to shop there. And I love that city. It's to me, it's the most beautiful city in our country. And it was heartbreaking seeing that, and I started reading about homelessness to try to figure out why is this happening. And my son, Connor, actually turned me on to a writer called Matthew Desmond, and who's the leading researcher on homelessness. He's written a book called Evicted, which is kind of the seminal work on it. He focused on San Francisco, and with the University of San Francisco, they did a study where they went out and gave questionnaires to all the homeless people. My assumption about homelessness is that it's driven by drug addiction, by mental illness, and by extreme poverty. And that the people, there's so many, there's 525,000 homeless people in this country. It's growing exponentially, but right now there's 525,000. But 50% of the unsheltered homeless are in California. So, and it only has 12% of the population. So why is that? And my assumption was that people from Detroit and New York who went homeless and didn't want to sleep on a grate in the snow, would say, well, I might as well be homeless in San Francisco and take a bus out there with their last couple of bucks. And I've also heard that police in some cities put, instead of putting homeless in jail, they put them on a bus to San Francisco. And that, also San Francisco is known to have a very welcoming social service system, and maybe that attracts people. But what Desmond showed is that virtually all the people who are homeless in San Francisco are from San Francisco. They didn't migrate there. And he shows that there's other places in this country, including Detroit, that have a much higher level of drug addiction, and West Virginia, and they have much higher levels of poverty. San Francisco is the richest city in this country, and those places don't have massive homelessness problems. So what is it? And what Desmond shows is it directly a function of the cost of housing. And the cost of housing in California is the highest in our country. The price of a house, average price in Los Angeles is $825,000. And what Desmond shows is that epidemic of homelessness that is now afflicting California is about to move in a wave across the country because the price of housing is rising exponentially all across our country. 2 years ago, the average cost of a home in this country was $200,000 or $215,000. Today it's $400,000. And the interest rates have gone from 3% to 7%. So that house is costing 4 or 5 times what it was back then. And, our kids, for most of the people, Detroit is a little different because there's been so much depopulation here that there are, the housing prices are lower. But for most of the country, it's very difficult for young people to find a home. I have 7 kids. My oldest is 39 and he has a home, but the other 6 aren't even thinking of getting homes, and they have no plan to. They're worried about paying off their college loans. And that whole generation, the promise that we had in this country was the essential promise, the American dream, that if you worked hard, if you played by the rules, you could finance a home, you could take a summer vacation, you could raise a family and put something aside for your retirement on one job. And that is no longer true for Americans. That my kids' generation, that's a joke to them. They're owning a home is important in this country, and it's important for a bunch of reasons. Widespread home ownership is important because if you own a home, you care about your community, you care about your hospitals, your schools, your police, your neighbors, the appearance of your home, and you're part of the community. You also have equity so that you can borrow money. And that means if you want to start a business, if you have an entrepreneurial impulse, you can do that. We had a period after World War II, immediately afterward, we had a 50-year period that economists call the great prosperity, when the American middle class became the greatest economic engine in the history of mankind. When I was a kid, when my uncle was president, this country owned half the wealth on the face of the earth. We were the biggest exporter of goods. We exported more than all other countries combined. And that prosperity was kicked off by widespread home ownership. Why are homes increasing in value? Well, everything is. Everything is subject to inflation. The inflation's coming from the fact that we spent $8 trillion on wars over the past 20 years, 16 trillion on COVID that we didn't have. So we're printing the money. And when you do that, you get inflation. And but homes are going up faster than anything. And why is that? Well, one of the principal reasons is that there's 3 giant corporations. There's a lot of others, but there's 3 giant corporations. State Street, Vanguard, and BlackRock, which are the biggest companies. They own each other, so it's really one huge company. And they have subsidiaries like Blackstone, which are buying up the single-family home. They own, collectively, those 3 companies own 88% of the S&P 500. So they own the stock market, literally. And they're now trying to buy the single-family homes in our country. They already accumulated in the last couple of years 5%. And they're on track to get 40 to 60% within 6 years. And they have so our kids are competing against them for the cost of money. And their cost of money is 60, 80, 100% lower than the cost your children are going to be paying for money. And, our country, our democracy, Thomas Jefferson said American democracy was based upon tens of thousands of independent freeholders owning their own property, owning land, and having a stake in our system. And we're now moving toward this kind of colonial or feudal aristocratic model where there's an aristocracy that controls the economy, the whole stock market, and is buying up all the farmland, and is now buying up the residential real estate and the single-family homes in our country. And it's not, when you, if you have a nation of homeowners, you have a nation of citizens who have an entree into the capitalist marketplace because they can borrow money, they have access to capital. Once you turn into renters, you go from being citizens to being subjects. And, I'm running against 2 presidents who have served 4 years in office and are running on the idea that they brought tremendous prosperity to our country. And I've spent a lot of time over the past 6 months since I entered this race sitting at people's kitchen tables and talking to them about their lives. But I also, long before that, that's what I do for a living. I talk to people from every kind of group of people in our country, because I represent people who've been injured by big corporations. So I'm representing today 1,000 families whose lives were upended in Columbiana County, Ohio, whose lives were upended by the Norfolk Southern spill. Until recently, I was representing 10,000 families in Spelter, West Virginia, who were poisoned by a zinc smelter there. I represent another 10,000 on the Ohio-West Virginia border who were poisoned by DuPont's PFOAs, and then 40,000 people around the country, who were poisoned by Monsanto. I end up spending a lot of time talking to people about their lives. And, when they hear that President Biden and President Bush or President Trump are saying that that we're experiencing a great prosperity in this country, they feel like they're being gaslighted. We're now in the average salary in our country, the average income for an American today is $5,000 less than the cost of basic human needs of food, transportation, and housing. So, and that means if you get just the basic things that you need to survive, you're going to owe $5,000 at the end of the year. And how are Americans dealing with that? They're dealing with it by putting that bill on their credit cards. And we hit 2 weeks ago a milestone in this country, $1 trillion in personal credit card debt. Oh, and it's gone up in 3 years, $330 billion, $330 billion, $1 trillion we now owe, individual Americans owe. And the credit card companies are charging them 22% interest. If the mafia did that, it would be called loan sharking, and they would go to prison. But when Visa, MasterCard, Wells Fargo, Chase, Citibank, and Morgan do that, it's just business as usual. Who do you think owns every one of those companies? BlackRock, right? Oh, BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard. And so they're strip mining the wealth from the American people, and they're doing it right in front of us. During the COVID epidemic, there was, we shut down 3.3 million businesses in this country. And we left open Amazon, and we all got a lesson on how to use it. I didn't know how to use it. I'm embarrassed. I should be embarrassed. I'm not embarrassed, but I should be embarrassed to say that I didn't know how to use Amazon before COVID. And I have to say that it's a magical experience. You just you find a picture of something you like, and you hit a button, and the next day it's in your driveway. And, so it's seductive. But Amazon got to close down all of its competitors, which is the Main Street of America. The retailers who were paying taxes in this community. The guy who hires your kid during summer, when he needs it for a summer job. The place that has a plaque on the wall from the local Boy Scout troop thanking him. And the little retail outlets that pay for your kids' hockey jerseys and their Little League uniforms. And they all got closed. And they were paying taxes here. And Amazon, of course, does not pay local taxes, but it pays federal taxes, right? At least. No. 0 last year. 0, not $1. So, like I said, they're doing it right in front of us. They're strip mining the wealth. And who owns Amazon? Well, Jeffrey Bezos owns the biggest, but the biggest, he owns a big chunk, but the biggest chunk is owned by Blackguard and Vanguard. So they're doing it right in front of us. And I don't see people talking about prosperity. I see people talking about disintegration and desperation. And disintegration of not just economic disintegration, but mental health and physical health, and the communities, our communities falling apart and atomizing, and people at each other's throats because of the desperation they live with day by day. I see Americans making choices that I never imagined they'd make. I talk to elderly people who are cutting up their prescription pills in two so they can stretch them out for the week. People who are changing ingredients to get through the grocery line. People who are a kid I talked to the other day who said every Tuesday he has to make a choice about whether getting gas for his automobile or buying a meal that day, buying dinner that day. A young couple sitting in an apartment that they can no longer afford because the consolidation of housing by these big companies is driving up the price of rents, and having a crying baby in their lap and having to argue with each other about whether that baby is $50 sick or $100 sick or $1,500 sick before they bring them to a hospital. These are choices, Americans shouldn't have to make between gas and food, home heating oil and food. And yet, half of this country is making those choices. And, people are living paycheck to paycheck. 57% of Americans cannot put their hands on $1,000 if they have an emergency. Those people, they get a flat tire in their car or the engine light comes on and it's the apocalypse. They can see their life circling the train. They can see that if they can't afford that mechanic, they're going to lose their transportation to work, then they're going to lose their job, and then they're going to end up on the street like those people in San Francisco. That's what happened to them. They weren't drug addicts after all. They were just people who had a little string, who had an engine light that they could not pay for. You know, there are American brothers and sisters, and a minor thing like a couple of flat tires puts them on the street. And that's not the way that things are supposed to go in this country. You know, when the engine light goes on, or when the gas gauge is on empty in your car, and how that focuses your mind, how you can't think of anything else. You just are thinking, am I going to make this gas station? And then what is this night going to look like? Now, amplify that by putting a couple of kids in the back of your car. And now you're driving through a bad neighborhood. And that level of anxiety is what half our country wakes up with every day and then lives their day, the sense of impending doom. The sense that, you know, people who are living paycheck to paycheck and already cannot pay their bills. And, you know, I lived I grew up in a different time when the promise of the American dream was real. And I saw President Biden come to Hawaii on 9/11. He was coming back from Vietnam. And he made a speech where he was commemorating 9/11, and he said something that I thought was extraordinary for a Democrat. He said they hated us for our freedoms. That's why they bombed the World Trade Center. That's what George Bush said, and he was ridiculed by Democrats 20 years ago. And, you know, I went on Neil Cavuto the next day, and I said, that's not true. That's propaganda. That's not truth. You know, Osama bin Laden was very clear about why he bombed the World Trade Center. He bombed the World Trade Center because we put 2 bases in Mecca, next to Mecca. And, you know, Osama bin Laden said, I love the United States. Because we supported him in Afghanistan. We fought side by side with him, throwing the Russians out of Afghanistan. And until we put those bases in Mecca, he was our friend. So, you know, but why do we have to tell ourselves they hate us for our freedoms? You know, why are we telling ourselves that which is not true? And, you know, when I grew up at a time when everybody wanted what we had in our country. They wanted our clothes. You know, I traveled with my parents with my mom and dad and 3 of my siblings around the world. The older kids in my family, and people would come up, strangers would come up and try to buy my blue jeans. They wanted American-made transistor radios. They wanted RCA Victrolas. And more than anything, they wanted our automobiles. The American automobile was the gold standard automobile in every country in the world. Everybody wanted them. And but more than anything, they wanted our leadership. And they believed in our moral authority. They knew the difference between leadership and bullying. I went to Poland in 1964, about a year after my uncle was killed, with my dad and, you know, my 3 elder siblings, my mom. And we went, the Polish government didn't want us there. My father had been invited by a local human rights democratic activist group. And the Polish government made clear that they did not want us in the country. And when we got there, they blacked out any news of our presence in the company in the state-owned media, which is all the media. Before we went, my mother brought us shopping, the kids shopping in Washington, D.C., to buy gifts for kids who were in an orphanage in Warsaw. And we bought clothing, American toys, all this stuff. And we were very excited about giving to these children. But when we got to the orphanage, the communist government had taken all the kids out because they didn't want them to have contact with Americans. 2 days later, we went to Krakow. to visit the cardinal at the Cathedral of the Black Madonna. And that cardinal was a living saint. He had stood up to the communists, he had resisted, he had gone to jail, he had been tortured. He had endured this suffering with such dignity and piety and strength that he had inspired a religious resurgence in the Catholic Church in Poland. And and it was known by everybody that he was going to be beatified by the Catholic Church the moment that he died. So for us as little Catholic kids, it was the biggest thrill of our lives that we were going to meet a living saint. We went there, when we went up the stairs of the cathedral, we went through Krakow Square, which is one of the biggest squares in Europe. It looked like a mile long. And it was dead empty. There wasn't a single person there. And when we went in, we spent about 3.5 hours inside. When we came out, there were 1 million people waiting for us. And the entire city of Krakow had emptied out to come see us. The word of our presence had spread by word of mouth. And the embassy limousine was stuck in this sea of people and couldn't move. And so we were there for hours. My father pulled us through the window up onto the roof of the car, and he gave a speech to the crowd, and then they started singing. They sang Sto Lat, which means may you live forever. And then they sang something, I'm not sure it was the Polish national anthem, but it was a song that was illegal to sing at that time. I think it was an anti-communist song. And they sang it again and again and again and again in defiance of their government. And I was, this little kid standing up there writing autographs and watching the tears flow down people's faces and the love that they had for, my family reaching up to touch us. And I saw the same thing in France, in Germany, on this same trip, in England, in Greece, in Italy. They didn't hate us for our freedoms. They loved us for our freedoms. They loved us because we were the exemplary democracy, because we were the model of free speech and all these other freedoms that they wanted. And, one of the reasons they really loved us is because my uncle, President Kennedy, had made a strategic decision during his presidency to keep the country out of war, to project economic power abroad rather than military power. My uncle's one of his two best friends, Ben Bradley, who was the editor of the Washington Post, asked my uncle one time, what do you want as your epitaph on your gravestone? And my uncle told him he kept the peace. He said the primary job of a president of the United States is to keep the country out of war. And he said he didn't want children in Africa and children in Latin America and Asia, when they heard the word United States of America, to think of a man with a gun in a military uniform. They wanted him to think of a Peace Corps volunteer. He wanted him to think of the Kennedy Milk Program, which gave nutrition to millions of children around the world. He wanted them to think of the Alliance for Progress, the USAID, which he started to put America on the side of the poor, to try to build middle classes in countries around the world, like we had done successfully in our country, which had created this incredible economic engine, the greatest economic generator in mankind's history, the American middle class. And it was a model of democracy. And my uncle, 3 days before he took off, I was at his inauguration in 1961. 3 days earlier, the outgoing president, Dwight Eisenhower, gave what today we should regard as the most important speech in American history, which was the speech where his farewell address, where he warned Americans against the emergence and domination by a military-industrial complex that would transform our nation into an imperium abroad and a surveillance state, a garrison state, a security state at home. And my uncle was already aligned with that idea, and 4 months into office, the CIA, Allen Dulles, and his Joint Chiefs of Staff came to him and lied to him about the about the Bay of Pigs invasion. And when those men were dying on the beach, he took credit, he took blame for it publicly. But privately, he knew he'd been tricked. And he said to his closest aides, he said, I want to take the CIA and shatter it into 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the winds. And the next 1,000 days of his presidency was just a fist fight with his military-industrial complex and his intelligence apparatus to keep the country out of war. And he realized the function of that agency, and now it devolved from protecting American security interests and representing the interests of the State Department and the White House to embroiling America in a constant pipeline of new wars to feed the military-industrial complex. Oh, he refused to go into Laos in the Pentagon in 1961. The Pentagon called him a traitor, his own Joint Chiefs. He refused to go into Cuba that year, at the Bay of Pigs. He refused the next year to go in for the Cuban Missile Crisis. He refused to go into Berlin in '62, and he refused to send troops to Vietnam, combat troops. He sent his close aide, including people he trusted and loved, like General Max Taylor, a very close personal friend of him and my dad, Averell Harriman, Dean Acheson, and Bob McNamara, all said, you got to send 250,000 troops to Vietnam or the government's going to collapse. And he said, it's their government. It's their fight. We can help them like the French did with us during the Revolution, but we can't fight their war for them. And he ended up sending 16,000 military advisors, which incidentally is fewer people than he sent to Ole Miss. The integration of Ole Miss was 60 days or 60 years ago yesterday. And it was fewer people than he sent to Oxford, Mississippi to get one black man, James Meredith, into the University of Mississippi. And they weren't technically allowed to participate in combat, but they did anyway, some of them. And he heard in October 22nd, 1962, he heard that a Green Beret had died. And he asked his aide, Walt Rostow, bring me a casualty list for everybody who's died. He brought him a casualty list. There were 75 people on it. And he said, that's too many. And that afternoon, he signed National Security Order 263, ordering all troops, all military personnel home from Vietnam by 1965, with the first 1,000 coming home in December '63, which was a month later. 30 days after he signed that, he was assassinated. And a week after his murder, President Johnson remanded that order and sent 250,000 troops over, and it became America's war. My father ran against it in '68 and was killed. Martin Luther King became a peace activist that year, and 2 months before my father died, he was killed. And those traumas, my uncle's death, my father's death, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, who was also protesting the war, and then the Vietnam War, and the other traumas, 9/11 and COVID, each one of those pushed us further down that pathway that Eisenhower had warned us against till we ended up where we are today, which is, was something that you can barely call a democracy anymore, that not all of us feel is less of a democracy than a rigged system, and that the predominant value is this, the biggest industry we have now is the war industry. And, now we spent $8 trillion on wars since 2021. 2001, $8 trillion. And the same period, we spent all wars that did no good for our country, that made us less safe as individuals, less safe as a nation, that bankrupted the middle class in this country. Iraq is worse off than we found it. That was the big one, $4.1 trillion. it's worse off. We killed more Iraqis than Saddam Hussein. We pushed Iraq into a proxy posture with Iran, which is exactly the outcome we were trying to avoid. We've left that country this warring, chaos between Shia and Sunni death squads. It hardly can be called a nation. We created ISIS. We drove 2 million refugees into Europe, which precipitated Brexit and the riots that they're having in France today. That is what we got for that $8 trillion. And the Chinese during that same period spent $8 trillion. Oh, we were bombing bridges, ports, schools, and roads. They spent $8 trillion building ports, schools, airports, roads, etc. And they are now eating our lunch all around the world. The friends that they made, turned out to be much more loyal and much better friends. They're now the primary creditor in virtually every nation in Latin America. And they weren't even on the radar there 10 years ago. We were. We've lost all those relationships. We've lost the capacity to build things. Rice University used to, 20 years ago, graduated 20% of the engineers in the world. Now it's 1%. The Chinese are, every time they build a road in Ecuador, they get 20 years of oil revenues from Ecuador as a security. They build a road, they send hundreds of engineers because they can build things. And they send hundreds of engineers to do the work. They help their economy, they improve those economies abroad, they improve their relationship, and now they've created BRICS. And by the way, if we even tried to build a road in Ecuador today, we don't have the engineering bench to do it. We can't build stuff anymore. We used to be the country that built everything, that knew, that had know-how and innovation. We have technology. We can't build anything, of steel and brick and mortar. And we've lost, we're losing the heart of our country. And it's all driven by this war. Now, we've spent 113, we committed in March, 113 for Ukraine. A war we should have never had. A war the Russians tried twice to settle with us, and we sabotaged those agreements. People within, our government. We committed $113 billion. And now this week, both the Republicans and the Democrats, the Unit Party, have agreed to send another $24 billion. When Zelensky came to visit. So, what does that mean? Just to give you a little feeling for that, the entire budget for EPA is $12 billion. That's all we have for the environment in this country. That's all we got. That's 1/12 of what we sent to Ukraine. The entire budget for CDC, $12 billion. That's all we got for public health. And I'm not saying either of those agencies spend that money well, because they don't. I want to fix that. And the month, March 2022, we committed that $113 billion. That same month, we cut food stamps to 30 million Americans from $283 a month to $23 a month. You try eating on $23 a month. And we cut Medicare to 15 million Americans that same month. That same month, the Fed printed $300 billion extra dollars unanticipated to bail out the Silicon Valley Bank. So when the bankers need the money, and when the military-industrial complex needs the money, we got plenty of it. But when Americans are starving, regular Americans are starving, when they can't get access medical care, we don't have anything for them. We have our priorities messed up in this country. And we need to fix it. That month, March of 2022, Mitch McConnell was asked, who drummed Biden's $113 billion for Ukraine through the Senate, he was asked, can we really afford to send $113 billion to Ukraine? And he said, don't worry, because the money is not really going to Ukraine. The money is going to US military contractors, to Raytheon, General Dynamics, Boeing, and Lockheed. So he just admitted it's all a money laundering scheme for the contractors. Who do you think owns every one of those companies? BlackRock. So, and then, you know, I saw the other night Tim Scott on the Republican debate where they were all talking about the Ukraine war and how they were gonna, you know, make it, you know, really beat the Russians, which they're not gonna do. But they said they all promised to, before they go to war with Mexico and then go to war with China. First, they're gonna, you know, finish up this one. So Tim Scott said, somebody there, I think Vivek, and wait a minute, you know, it's 113 billion. He said, don't worry, it's not, this isn't a gift, it's a loan. How many of you think that loan's gonna get paid back?
Yeah, right.
Right, nobody. Nobody believes it's gonna get paid back. So why do they even bother calling it a loan? They're not fooling anybody. Well, if you call it a loan, you can impose loan conditions on it. What are those loan conditions? Well, the loan conditions are, first of all, severe austerity programs. So if you're poor in Ukraine, you're out of luck. But the big kahuna is that Ukraine has to put all of its assets up for sale to US corporations. So, you know, its ports, its airports, it's, you know, anything it building, anything it owns, but most importantly, it has to put its farmland. The farmland is the biggest asset Ukraine has. It is the breadbasket of Europe. It's the richest farmland on earth. People say that there have been 1,000 years of war fought over control of that farmland. People say that there's a joke that if you throw a boot on the ground in Ukraine's agriculture areas, something will grow that you can eat because it's so rich. Oh, everybody wants it. And the loan agreement is that Ukraine has to put it all up for sale on an international land market. 30% has now been sold. Who do you think that, well, it's the biggest buyers are Cargill, DuPont, and Monsanto. And Cargill is mainly privately owned, but there's one public owner of it. And then the other two are owned by this same company, and what do you think that company is? Yeah, BlackRock. So, you know, the head of BlackRock has $10 trillion under management. The GDP of California is $10 trillion. The GDP of California is $3 trillion. And so it's 3 times the size of California. California is the 5th biggest economy in the world. And BlackRock is the 3rd biggest in the world. So, and the head of BlackRock, Larry Fink, is on the board of the World Economic Forum. And World Economic Forum, of course, you know, meets every year. It's called the Billionaires Boys Club in Davos to plan what the world is going to look like for the rest of us. And they call that vision they call it the Great Reset. When he was asked what that means, Klaus Schwab, who's the head of the forum, said it means that you will own nothing and yet you will be happy. And so they're on their way to making sure that the first part of that is going to happen really quickly. And like I said, they're doing it in front of us. And how do they keep this all in place? How do they get away with this? They get away with it by keeping us all fighting with each other.
Yeah.
You know, blacks against whites, immigrants against migrants, Republicans against Democrats. And, you know, when the king and queen look over the balustrades of their castle, and all of their subjects are fighting. They go back to the feast and they pop champagne corks because they know nobody's coming over the wall for them. And what I intend to do with this campaign is to stop the fighting and get everybody to go over the wall and take back our country. It's like the old trick of the jangling keys. You're to rob a bank and you have one of the crooks who's standing in the middle jangling keys and saying, everybody look over here, and the rest of them are just, robbing us blind. And that's what's happening. There's a lot of names for this strategy. It used to be called the Bourbon strategy. But they've got us all fighting over these little issues, over issues that are important, over things like guns and abortion and trans and, and immigration and stuff. And all of those are issues that are important, but they're not central. And as long as we're fighting over that stuff, they're just robbing us blind. They're destroying everything that, we created this country for. And I know I'm running. I've never intended to run for president. I wasn't sitting around. I would have lived my life a lot differently if I had. Because of what I've done for 40 years, which is to sue these big corporations and sue these agencies, I know how to unravel the corporate capture that is at the center of this corrupt collusion of state and corporate power that is vacuuming the wealth from the American public. I've sued almost all of these agencies. I've sued the USDA repeatedly. I've sued DOD. I've sued FDA, NIH, CDC, EPA, and FCC. I just won a case against FCC on cell phone safety, and they're all captured agencies. And a lot of politicians come in and they say, "I'm going to drain the swamp," and they intend to do it, I believe. But then they get up there and they look at these big agencies that have 30,000 people in them, and each one of those levels can commit civil disobediences that will, embarrass the president. So they're scared of them, and they end up just picking somebody from industry who is safe and who's going to run that agency. And so nothing ever changes. And I'm not going to do that. I'm going to actually fix them. And I know in a lot of the agencies, I know the individuals that need to be moved. When I sued Monsanto, we came across discovery documents, emails, hundreds of emails from the head of the pesticide division at EPA, a guy called Jess Rowland, who disappeared during the Monsanto trial when we were trying to subpoena him, and the top bosses at Monsanto. And it turns out we were paying him a salary during all those years. But he was secretly working for Monsanto, and they would tell him, "We need you to fix this study. We need you to falsify this science." And he was doing. At one point, we had an email where they were saying, "We need you to kill this study that another agency, an agency called the ATSDR, was doing, on that would link Monsanto Roundup to cancer." And he said, "That's not even my agency, but I can kill it. But if I do, you better give me a gold medal." So we have had that email to show the jury. That's one of the reasons the jury gave us $2 billion in the last trial. They were so angry at the corruption. But that's in every agency. And that is the rule rather than, the exception. And I can name you who those people are at CDC, who they are at NIH, who they are at EPA. And USDA, and I also know the perverse incentive system that link and bind those agencies to the industries they're supposed to regulate and turn them into sock puppets for those industries. So President Trump said he was going to drain the swamp, but then he came in and he appointed John Bolton as his head of NSA. And he took Scott Gottlieb, who was the business partner of Pfizer, and made him head of FDA. And he shut down the Vaccine Safety Commission, which Trump had asked me to do early in his presidency. And then he did an $88 billion favor for Pfizer, his business partner, and then he left FDA to go on the Pfizer board to cash in. Oh, and that's how the system works. And I'm sure President Trump didn't intend to do that. He probably intended to drain the swamp, but he did the opposite. And he didn't understand how to do it. And I do, and I also, I've watched during my lifetime, I've, given my heart and soul for certain politicians who've run for office and then betrayed all the values that had, attracted me to them. And I know that you people want somebody who's not going to do that, and I'm that person.
Yeah.
And the Republican Party has the same donor base: BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, Pfizer, Raytheon, General Dynamics. They're all, they now run both political parties, and that's why the Democratic Party does not like progressives like me. That's why they had to kill Tulsi Gabbard. It's why they had to kill Bernie. It's why they won't give me a fair shot. And you saw, what they did to Bernie. Well, I'm 10 times as dangerous to them as Bernie was. I can't do this alone. I'm the spear tip, but I have to be the spear tip of a big army. And all of you are. I need your help. I need this to be. We're getting now. We have over 200,000 volunteers. We're getting the biggest crowds of any candidate, except for probably President Trump, but much bigger than President Biden. And we're getting them in every part of this country. And I need you to come. So many of you, I'm touched that you came out tonight. I need you to keep fighting. I need you to do things. Wear a Kennedy t-shirt, wear a Kennedy button, Kennedy hat. Put a lawn sign on your lawn. You need to spread the word, and convert Americans one at a time. There's large parts of this, a lot of Democrats in this country, have never heard me. They're reading characterizations of me that they hear on MSNBC and CNN and the New York Times. And if that was if I was in that bubble, I would think that I was a first-class insane person. But when they hear me talk, there's a high conversion rate. And so, get people to listen to a podcast or something, an interview with Tucker or Joe Rogan, and just say, spend 10 minutes doing this, because when you do that, there's a very, very high conversion rate. So I need your help. I hope that you'll go to Kennedy24.com and sign up as a volunteer. We're going to need a lot of help over the next couple of months. So I want to thank you. I'm going to tell you something logistic, first of all. I'm going to answer some questions now. And after we answer the questions, I'm going to take selfies with everybody here who wants to take one. We have a system that we've worked out for doing that. We're really good. It seems insurmountable because there's a lot of you. We did the other day in Charleston, South Carolina, we did 600 people in 24 minutes. We have a method. If you cooperate, you kind of have to keep walking. I'll talk to you, but you have to keep moving all the time, and you have to have your phone ready. And we have a couple people who are going to take your phone and then snap a photo. So thank you all very much for being here.
Hello, my name is Justin Ostrander. I'm 17 years old, and next year I'll be a first-time voter. I was wondering, what do you think is the best reason that I should vote for you?
Well, I think there's like 10 reasons you shouldn't. And you saw, I think, 8 of them on the Republican debate the other night. But no, listen, if you watch that debate, they were talking about all of those issues that are 30 years old, the culture war issues. And I think if your age group are my biggest demographic, because I am deeply concerned about what happens to kids. And I grew up, the biggest asset that I had when I was a kid was pride in my country and a hope for my future. I just assumed I'd be able to do things. And so in 2013, they took a poll of kids between 18 and 24, and 85% of them said they were proud of the United States of America. They took the same poll a couple of months ago, and 17% said they were. And that to me is one of the most heartbreaking data points that I've seen since the beginning. I want you to have pride in this country, and I can tell you I'll do everything I can to restore that for you and to make sure that you have that asset.
Welcome to Macomb County, and I just want you to say a couple of words about the vaccinations. I want to get your stance on it, please.
About it, well, I'm called anti-vax all the time, but I've never been anti-vax. What I say is, let's have good science. Let's have regulatory agencies that are not captured. It's kind of go look at, there's 2 documentaries out now, one called Painkiller and the other called Dope Sick. I think they're on Hulu and Netflix, respectively, but they're details, they're playbooks about the corruption of these agencies and how FDA launched the opioid epidemic in this country that's now killing 106,000 kids a year, twice the number each year that died during 20 years of the Vietnam War. And how they launched it because a pharmaceutical company, Purdue, was able to manipulate and seduce the regulators to do something they knew was a lie, which is to put on their label that it was not addictive and that it was safe and effective. Oh, everybody knows they did that. And so shouldn't we be skeptical about this collusion between pharmaceutical companies and the regulatory agency? And that's just I think that just common sense tells us that we should be skeptical. I never tell anybody, I don't tell people don't get this vaccine, big groups of people anyway. I just don't do that. But what I want is peer-reviewed, placebo-controlled trials for every vaccine. And vaccines for vaccinated children, none of them have had that. None of them have had that pre-licensure. And, I said that for many years. Anthony Fauci said publicly that I was lying. And then President Trump made him meet with me in 2017, March of 2017. And Del Bigtree was there, Aaron Siri was there, and Lynn Redwood, and Francis Collins, and Fauci. I met with all the people at the agencies, including Peter Marks at FDA. And I said at that time, I said, Tony, you've been publicly saying I'm lying because I say there's no pre-licensing safety studies for any of the 72 childhood vaccines. Can you show me one? And he made a show of ruffling through this. They had brought a bunch of red wells of these files with the studies in them on a big tray. And he made a show of going through them, and then he said, the studies are back in Bethesda. And I said, can you send them to me? And he said, yes. So he never did, so we sued him under the Freedom of Information Act. after years stonewalling us, they, on the courthouse steps, they gave us a letter of admission that they don't have any. Oh, and that letter is published on CHD, Children's Health Defense website. Anybody can look at it. And so what I want is I want robust science. I want everybody to know from peer-reviewed studies, placebo-controlled studies that look at outcomes in an exposed group and outcomes in a placebo group, and look at them over an 8-year period, because a lot of the injuries from all medications have long diagnostic horizons and long incubation periods. So Tony Fauci himself says that with vaccines you need 8 years. You know how long the safety study was for the hepatitis B vaccine? 4 days, exactly. 4 days. And there was no placebo. Oh, that's not good. And the other ones are not much better. So that's all I want. I just want good science. If somebody comes up with a vaccine that does what they say they're going to do, which is I take it today and 10 years from now I'm more likely to be alive and healthier than not, I'd be the first in line. Let's see the science first.
Thank you so much for doing this and spending the time and the effort to do this. We really appreciate the alternative. So, thank you.
Thank you.
My question is, you were speaking of podcasts, and I know you just had one with David Stockton. Can you tell us the biggest takeaway you had from your conversation with David Stockton? Maybe just one of those. And the second part of the question is...
With Stockman.
Stockman, excuse me.
Yeah.
The second part of the question is, one of the best things that President Obama did was to form a national commission on fiscal responsibility and reform. Would you be willing to go back and dust that off and actually take a look at it?
I don't know what it does.
It was the Simpson-Bowles study on the economy and what we should really do with the economy back in, I think it was in 2007.
Yeah, of course.
So anyways, maybe you could talk about David Stockton.
Yeah, so Dave, for those of you who don't remember David Stockman, he was the budget director for Ronald Reagan, who made these drastic cuts in government, including in EPA. And so for me at that time, I was one of the leading environmentalists in the country, and I was, to me, he was like Darth Vader. And but he's now our philosophies have merged, I would say. He's very much, in most respects, I think we're very, very much aligned. He sees the military-industrial complex as the greatest threat to the American economy and American values. He's aligned with me on the chronic disease epidemic, which is, costs us $3.7 trillion, $3.7 trillion a year. And he's aligned with me on human rights issues, on free speech, etc. So it was, when I went on with him, he's very, first of all, he's got to have an 180 IQ. He has total recall. He's incredibly articulate. He speaks in fully formed sentences that are perfectly constructed, in perfectly constructed paragraphs. And you have a casual conversation with him, and it sounds like somebody spent 20 hours formulating the wording of it. So it's very poetic the way he talks, and it's beautiful. And I love, that kind of eloquence. And so for me, it was just an incredibly joyful experience of finding somebody who was my enemy. And now he's my friend, and he's a big supporter for me, and I asked him to craft my economic program, and he did a brilliant, brilliant job at doing it. I have people from the whole map who are giving me incredible economic advice. Jeffrey Sachs, who was a globalist, and it was exactly the opposite of Stockman, and now has also merged and is very anti-war and is agreement. So it's been. I think a lot of us had this experience during COVID of losing a lot of relationships, and then finding a lot of relationships. And you know, the best relationships come from shared values rather than blood or, you know, and I think so many of us, you know, the people in this room are people who come from all, you know, probably at least half of you are Republican, a lot of you are independent, you know, a lot of you are Democrats, but we all, you know, have a shared value that brought us into this room tonight, a shared vision of what this country should be looking like.
Thank you for speaking up for unity, community, and civility, because if we don't have any of these, we have nothing. And you are a perfect example, and how you speak to us is a perfect example of how you will lead this country. I was wondering, do you have a plan for extradition for the United States from the WHO treaty?
I don't even know there's an extradition clause in the WHO. Oh, you're talking about extracting the United States from the WHO? That's not even a starting point. I am going to fix the WHO, and it's not going to be dictating policy of the United States. I mean, that's such a concept. I mean, you know, take a look at my Fauci book. Just pick a page randomly. Yeah, I'm not going to go along with the WHO. It's crazy that anybody is. I mean, we do. It says in the Constitution that treaties have to be ratified by the Senate. And, you know, they're trying to get it by without ratification. It's crazy. The whole thing is nuts. And the power that they have, that they can choose to declare a pandemic and then punish us, and then they can dictate the protocols and punish us if we don't comply. You know, who would do that? I mean, we know who would do it, but it's crazy.
Okay, we have time for one more question and then selfies.
I got one. Are you planning on running as a Democrat? Please say no.
If you want the answer to that question, you can come to Philadelphia. On our staff.
Yeah, right here.
Good evening, Mr. Kennedy. I'm Cynthia Haynes from Flint, Michigan. You did a Zoom with us.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, me and my colleagues were here, and I want to say thank you. I went through everything to get here, but I finally made it.
Thank you very, very much.
You know, I'm a resident of Flint, Michigan, and we're still dealing with our water situation. Buick has not cleaned up their site. Now they're asking us, the residents of Flint, to pay $72 million to help us, to help clean a site, a contaminated site that GM have left. Our children are still going through ups and downs with the lead. We still haven't got our water settlement. What would you do to make sure that another city, regardless of the economics, that would never ever have to go through what the Flint residents are going through, because we are going through it. Nobody has shown us any respect. Nobody has been held accountable. It has been private. Governor Dana Nelson, she has charged everybody else, but she dropped everything when it came to Flint, the people that harmed us and our children. What would you do, and how could you promise me, if I vote for you and I go back to Flint and let everybody know that this would never ever happen to another community again? How can you assure me? And we need people held accountable for the residents of the city of Flint has been lead poisoned.
Yeah, well, thank you first of all for coming here. Second of all, I think you know my background, which is I spent 40 years of my life building the biggest clean water organization on earth. That has been the focus of my life. I think one of my best, most important accomplishments is that I orchestrated through litigation originally. I sued, I think, about 26 people, including 3 consecutive mayors of New York, and the FD or the EPA to orchestrate, and then I sat through negotiations for 2 years to orchestrate the New York City watershed agreement, which protects the water quality of New York, which is probably the best water quality in this country. You know, I've brought over 500 lawsuits against corporate polluters, and to force them to pay the costs of their to hold them accountable, pay their costs. You know, they shouldn't be able to externalize their costs. If, you know, you show me a polluter, I'll show you a subsidy. I'll show you a fat cat using political clout to escape the discipline of the free market and force the public to pay their production costs. If you want to bring a product to market in a free market, you pay all the costs of getting it there, including the costs of cleaning up after yourself, which is a lesson we were all supposed to have learned in kindergarten. And, you know, GM and Buick have left that toxic material on site is unacceptable. The reason they've been able to do that is because EPA is owned by those companies. And, you know, when I get in there, it will be owned back again by the American people. So, where are we doing the selfie line? I know, so people come in where? Okay. Oh, people are going to come from this side. And thank you all very much, and I look forward to seeing you.